The mind-numbing boredom of quarantine and the isolation caused by COVID has caused all of us to turn to new fads or readopt habits of the past in search of any entertainment we can get. Who hasn't seen a social media post of someone making whipped coffee, baking sourdough bread, or attempting to master the newest TikTok dance? However, there's one face that hasn't made a comeback, yet deserves a second look. It's time we all don our polyester leisure suits and gold chains and get ready to jungle boogie through the groovy sound of the 1970s. Disco music. By embracing disco as a form of entertainment while we attempt to avoid any Saturday night fevers during this pandemic, we can better understand its unique cultural relevance and see that you and I will survive all this hot stuff. The music we identify as disco first emerged in the early 1970s and began to replace artists like the Beach Boys in favor of the fresh sound of groups like ABBA and the Bee Gees. Born out of exclusive, membership-only clubs throughout the US and Europe, disco flew below the radar of the general public because of its role as a reaction against the mainstream white rock groups of the time. The term disco was first coined when venues in Paris began using turntables to play music for clubgoers in the 1940s, causing some of the world's very first nightclubs to be considered discotheques. However, disco music as a style didn't emerge until the mid-1960s, when New York clubs began playing music similar stylistically to Eurodisco, supporting artists like Jerry Butler. Up until this point, the group disco catered to was exclusive and largely stayed out of the public eye. But soon, mainstream insight into these exclusive venues sparked the disco inferno in the US that we know today. In 1971, disco was televised for the first time through the Soul Train music and dancing show. And after music critic Vince Leti began regularly attending the dance club The Loft, he became enamored with disco as a style, and then published the first ever article about disco in the Rolling Stone, titled Discotheque Rock. This public exposure caused underground clubs to grow and accommodate high-tech speakers, large crowds donning their best platform shoes, and, of course, the classic disco ball. Prior to 1970, radio had largely ignored disco as a genre, but by the time 1978 rolled around, 200 disco-only radio stations existed in the US alone. At this point, everyone was saying, "I love the nightlife," resulting in Donna Summer, ABBA, and the Bee Gees topping charts and staying alive in our playlist to this very day. From its conception, disco has been an art form of resistance. The clubs in Europe that laid the groundwork for disco stylistically arose as a form of Nazi resistance as Hitler continually labeled music created by non-white artists as a degenerate influence. This led French resistance groups to create hidden dance clubs called discotheques, effectively turning the beat around. The influence of the discotheque was even present in the USSR, where under Stalin's strict rule, dancing at disco clubs was still permitted. However, the USSR began to freak out as disco music began to be seen as subversive. DJs became subject to strict regulation, and every dance had to be reported to the Communist Party so that music could be harshly censored. There was no love train for disco. We remember jazz for the way it amplified black artists in the 1920s, and rock and roll as a rebellious movement against established norms in the 60s. And yet, listening to disco conjures images of flashy lights, mass-produced music, and blatant commercialism in our minds. There was no love hangover for the style, and society's perception of disco as a mere 70s fad means that we miss out on the nuances of the music and the way it's impacted our society at large. To begin, the voices of the most popular songs were less masculine, and actually, for the first time, were primarily female. The club setting of the music meant that singers no longer had to water down their lyrics to make them radio-friendly, allowing singers to explore ideas of power and sexuality through music, giving us classics like Shake Your Booty and Do You Think I'm Sexy. This focus on sexuality via music made a dramatic departure from the past, where the few songs that didn't sweep sexuality under the rug would focus on the desire women created in men. However, prominent artists like Donna Summer re-centered this narrative, instead focusing their music on embracing female sexuality and female pleasure, causing singles like Love to Love You Baby to top charts for months at a time. The empowerment disco fostered arose partially as a result of the victory second-wave feminism had gained in the early 70s, with the ERA gaining traction in the passage of Title IX alongside the Roe v. Wade decision. These newfound changes in attitudes toward femininity and sexuality reflected themselves in disco's fashion scene, where spandex bodywear, wrap dresses, and billowy pants became the must-have pieces. Many feminists denounced disco fashion, labeling it as objectification of the female body. But designers and dancers alike defended their style. Much like the lyrics of the songs themselves, disco fashion was about empowerment for the individual, allowing clubgoers to choose between styles that ran the gamut from modest to revealing. Additionally, disco encouraged a newfound focus on men's fashion, and gave men the freedom to partake in traditionally feminine styles, and focus on their appearance free of judgment. Disco uniquely contributed to the empowerment of female artists, as well as a more positive perception of femininity and open sexuality. Additionally, don't stop until you get enough, because disco's unique cultural blend engendered the expression of fresh Black and Latinx artists who became wildly successful after previously being shunned by society. Disco music was rooted in funk, and became a crucial vehicle in displaying Black culture and uplifting Black singers. Previously, Black music had been thought of as primitive by white society, but the persistent use of rhythms in disco, as well as chanted phrases, shows the way it diverged from the music of the time and became a key tool to displaying Black culture to the rest of the world. The physical space disco occupied became a symbol of equality as well. Before disco's popularity, most dancing was restricted to couples between a male and a female, and dancing between two males had actually been outlawed by New York City. However, disco broke this norm and instead catered to large group dancing, creating a safe space for LGBTQ individuals where same-sex couples were able to dance together and enjoy the nightlife. Clubs like the Saint, or the Vatican of disco, claimed spaces and aesthetics that were traditionally heteronormative and turned them on their heads to create clubs that were a safe space for individuals to express themselves and be able to live their authentic truth. When examining today's society, the movement has still left its mark. For starters, by pioneering the 12-inch single to lengthen dance tracks, disco has, in turn, led to the songs we listen to today becoming lengthier, giving us all more time to act as dancing queens. Additionally, disco gave rise to DJing as a common practice. Since dance culture was a central component to disco stylistically, DJs matched the music they played to the reactions of the crowd by using techniques like listening ahead to the next song through headphones, or blending the two tunes and remixing popular singles. The rhythmic undertones, synths, and repetition of the music have also become mainstays and the inspiration for modern-day pop that makes you shake your groove thing. But most importantly, disco amplified the voices of artists who society overlooked before, and created a physical space through dance that was unique and inclusive, unlike any other that had come before it. But soon, the tarnish of disco's commercialism led to its last dance. When disco began to become perceived as popular, it created an influx of white working-class youth into the scene, which subsequently led to the gentrification of the genre. For the most part, LGBTQ and Black artists retained their success, but independent record labels soon became overtaken by the saturated music that reflected the commercialism of the time, as disco's audience became increasingly white and heterosexual. The Disco Sucks movement came to represent the pinnacle of resentment from rock fans. Rooted in racism and homophobia, the largest known Death to Disco rally was hosted in late July of 1979. At Disco Demolition Night, fans who brought a disco record to be destroyed got a reduced price to see the White Sox play, leading to a crowd of over 59,000 people attending. Records of not only disco music, but also Black and LGBTQ artists in general were blown up and burned on the field. As journalist Dave March reflected, young white males were the most prominent group in attendance, because they were the ones who felt the most threatened by disco's success. After Demolition Night, the mass production of disco caused its music to be seen as oversaturated and cheap, and it began to become aired less and less on the radio as the months went on. However, the downfall of disco led to artists to shift towards new forms of music, like boogie music and house, that birthed modern-day Latin freestyle, electronica, techno, and EDM. Today, disco rarely makes an appearance on the radio and occasionally turns up on the odd throwback playlist. Other genres of music still get the recognition for the footprint they have left on society and are revered for their success. And yet, most of us still perceive disco as superficial, tacky music, overlooking all the complexities and cultural value it holds. Instead, we should take a chance on meaningful disco music and see how it allows us to progress as individuals and society. Because once we realize that we are family, it's all a boogie wonderland.